Welcome back to Holistic Healing Association.
So I'm Terhi Korkiakangas. I have a doctorate in psychology and I specialize in developmental psychology. And we are here today talking about traumatic birth and attachment styles and how to parent children after a traumatic birth. So what is a traumatic birth and what's meant by it? Perhaps we can think about first how society thinks about birth and how we culturally think about birth as this happy, elated occasion, and we quite rarely immediately associate it with something traumatic or bad. Often in births that are very difficult or can cause trauma, there is a sense of loss of control and a mismatch between expectations and then the reality. And I'd like to point out that traumatic birth doesn't have to be life-threatening. It doesn't even have to necessarily involve a medical emergency, although sometimes they do, and they're very traumatic, such as emergency C-sections and having instrumental births and that type of thing. But many traumatic births actually include relational problems, not being heard, not being listened to. Medical professionals may be withholding information that you needed. Maybe you've been criticized or judged during childbirth. And in my case, the events following the birth of the child, so things that happened because things went wrong in the birth, that we ended up in being separated immediately after birth. So things like baby needing immediate medical care, having been taken to the NICU, and that type of things. And we now talk a lot about obstetric violence, which means that women feel like their bodies have been violated during birth experience, and that there's this fear-based coercion around women to approve certain procedures, for instance.
And can you tell us about your traumatic birth?
Yeah, so basically what happened with me that I had a full-term pregnancy and my water broke at home, which meant that I had to go to the hospital, and I called in advance and they told me, please come straight away because you have a risk of infection when you have ruptured membranes. And so went to the hospital straight away. And despite the fact that I had ruptured membranes, which means that the amniotic fluid was leaking out, the labor didn't start naturally. That can often happen, actually. It doesn't immediately happen after the water breaking. So they had to induce me. Now, the infection risk with ruptured membranes grows after 24 hours. Usually you want to have the baby out within 24 hours to avoid that risk of infection. And so I went in on Wednesday, but I didn't give birth until Saturday. So we're talking good 3-4 days.
That's a long time.
Yeah, that's incredibly long time. So part of my trauma relates to the fact that why I was allowed to go on for so long and what kind of information was held from me. Because I couldn't make an informed choice about a timely C-section. I was never told exactly that my baby was in danger. I was always told that my baby looked good on the monitor. They are, taking the heart rate monitor. Baby's heart rate was always okay. However, they did numerous internal exams for me to check my cervix And each time they did one of those checks, my infection risk increased. And I had a total of 7 exams done during the 3-4 days. And then eventually on Saturday, I spiked up fever. I spiked up hypertension as well. I had preeclampsia on Saturday. And so I had this infection of my uterus and the amniotic fluid that my daughter was still swimming in and breathing and swallowing. So
That's
I didn't,
scary.
yeah, so I didn't understand the gravity of the situation. I would have demanded a C-section within 24 hours had I known exactly what the risks were. And so my grievances really relate to how the medical professionals didn't communicate this to me. They didn't tell me exactly, hey, here's what can happen if you don't do a C-section today. Instead, I was always asked, do I want to continue laboring? As if it was a personal choice. Now, if I don't have the information I need, I think, okay, well, maybe I can keep going because I wanted the natural birth. I didn't want a C-section. And
But
so
they didn't
eventually
inform you.
they didn't inform me.
That would have been like horrific.
Yeah. So I didn't know my baby was in danger because of many of these reasons. And then there was a lot of other things as well that happened in the way that they didn't allow me to position my body in certain ways that would have opened up my pelvis and helped the baby, descend and come out. So I had to do a lot of sort of fawning like we talk in the trauma world about the fawn response. So you're fawning at the medical professionals because you are in a scary situation and there's like a power imbalance. They kind of have the power over you. So I did a lot of what they asked me to do, even though it didn't feel good. So I had definitely these relational issues during the childbirth. But the most traumatic thing was when my baby was born, that they took her immediately away. And I didn't understand exactly what was happening. My baby couldn't breathe. She had to be intubated immediately. They had to suction her lungs and stomach. She had suspected sepsis, pulmonary hypertension, and very severe case of meconium aspiration. So her lungs were filled with this tar-like substance, and she had to be put in the oxygen machine. And
Poor little girl.
yeah, so incredibly, and it all happened, and I had no understanding that once I finally got this baby out of my body, she was taken away. And only the gravity of the situation landed on me, and I understood this was so dangerous. She's in danger. So it was life-threatening for her.
Yeah.
And she spent 3 weeks, almost 3 weeks, in the NICU, neonatal intensive care unit, where she received good care. So she, finally pulled through. But the whole trauma of then having to live in the NICU for the first 3 weeks of her life, me not having any postpartum recovery that you would want a mother to have. I didn't
Right.
have that. I had to be in and out of taxi cabs, going into the NICU to be with my baby, traumatized and physically broken, recovering. So it was all a lot.
That does sound like a lot.
Yeah. So there's been a lot of processing of that and trying to do the best that I can after the fact.
And how did you process that traumatic birth? And how did you help your daughter process?
So two things happened to me like right after the birth. I went into this very surreal state where I didn't know. It felt surreal to think that I had had a baby. I didn't understand that I had given birth. And I was scanning the room where I was laying down. I couldn't get up because I was in magnesium drip for the preeclampsia. And there was a moment when I was alone in the room, and my baby was in the NICU. My partner was probably on his way to see our baby. So I was alone in the room, and I was scanning the room, and I was like, do I have a baby? Where is it? Where's my baby? Do I have a baby? Is there a baby in this building that belongs to me? Like this completely surreal feeling. So it talks about this biological need that we have between parents and babies. This attachment need is biologically wired. And I could actually sense that I am looking for my child. So I can still feel that mysterious, strange feeling that I had, slightly dissociating because the baby I had given birth to wasn't in my arms. And when the NICU doctor came into the room some hours later to inform me what was happening to my child, her words just went through me. I was looking at her and I had no expression. There was nothing in me. And she asked me if I had any questions for her. And I had none. I couldn't speak. I had no access to my vocabulary. So we're talking about the prefrontal areas are going offline in a trauma. It's a survival mechanism. So I was in this kind of dorsal shutdown mode when I couldn't connect. I couldn't. There was nothing in me
You were in
to
shock.
process that. Yes, in shock. So I didn't have emotional support. I didn't have resources. I didn't have anything. So I was kind of left alone on my own devices to deal with that.
That's really
So
hard.
yeah, I think we need a lot more of that type of care available to people, families immediately after birth. We have to understand the nervous system responses. First of all, we need to understand that when we are in labor and delivery, we need to feel safe. The body is simply not working. It shuts down reproductive organs, it shuts down labor if you're scared, if you are worried, if you're anxious, if people are disturbing you, walking in and out of the birth room. We need to really start to take that seriously. And then we need to understand the kind of the peas, the fawning response in the birth room. So just because woman might be going along with everything that's been ordered for her or told her that she should be pushing in this type of a position, or she should do this or that. And sometimes women go along with these things because they feel that they are in this threatening nervous system response, and it's a threatening situation. So we do need to really be mindful of how we're interacting with people or these medical professionals, how they are dealing with. So we need more resources, I think, for hospitals to understand how the trauma can happen through these relational interactions between the medical professionals.
And how do you build a secure attachment after a traumatic birth?
So this is, I think, one of my sort of lifelong attempts and lifelong since my daughter was born. I was very mindful of the fact that we had a very difficult beginning. And the secure attachment is really something that you hope for your child. Secure attachment really means that there is a healthy bond between the parent and the child. Let's say the mom and the child, because that stable, healthy emotional bond is really formed in the very early childhood, in the very early years. And it's crucial for the child's later emotional and sort of cognitive, even cognitive, psychological development, and how they carry that through life. It kind of builds a blueprint for feeling safe and secure and good in the world and in their own bodies. So I was mindful of, and because I know about child development, I wanted to do everything I can to use that information to try and attend to her in a way that was trauma informed, but at the same time, I was coming from my own traumatized experience that I had just been through in that childbirth and the NICU experience. So the attachment really, first of all, it's a biological need. Attachment theory talks about it being biological need to ensure the child's survival. And through the emotional bond with the mom, the primary caregiver, the baby begins to form these internal working models, which really mean representations of the self in relation to other people, and internal models of the self. So, am I lovable? Am I worthy? Is mom consistently there? Does she love me? Am I being accepted? So I think for us, having that early rupture in the NICU, I did a lot of trying to be very, very responsive to her. And to me, perhaps the key was to try and build a lot of physical connection, like a lot of holding, because she was little bit of touch deprived in the beginning because she
Okay.
had to be put in the incubator.
Mhm.
And she was tangled in wires, and I in the beginning couldn't hold her, so I would put my hand inside the incubator and rest my palm on her chest. I would stroke her face, her arms, her little feet, like try and get that touch inside the incubator. And another thing that kind of bothers me is that we know a lot about the benefits of skin to skin contact, and many hospitals should have these protocols in place whereby you help parents immediately to get the baby on the skin. So literally unbutton your shirt, baby on the skin, diaper only. So I was always handed, like when I got to hold her outside of the incubator, she was also always wrapped in this swaddle. And so she was like a burrito handed to me.
Okay.
And for a long time, the second week, even I was still kind of like holding her like that. And I always felt that was odd. And when I then finally demanded that I want to do like proper skin to skin time with my daughter, it became like this whole production. Like they had to wheel in these security screens, and I had to wait until they brought the screen so that I could unbutton my shirt. And I felt like I was inconveniencing them, wanting to hold my daughter in a proper way, skin to skin. And I want to say here, my daughter had feeding issues towards the end. So by the third week, we're like, when is she coming home? She's no longer in oxygen. She's breathing on her own. And they put these babies on a feeding schedule. And she wasn't passing their schedules. She wasn't eating as much as they wanted her to do in like a few minute window. So what happened was the day when I finally first asked to hold her, a skin to skin, she fell asleep for 3 hours on my chest. I was sitting in this chair, which was very uncomfortable for me to sit on because I had a tailbone injury, and I absolutely didn't care about my pain at that point when I had my daughter on my skin. She slept for 3 hours, and when she finally, a nurse came to kind of wake her up from that to have her scheduled feeding, she she ate more than she has ever done during a feeding.
Oh,
So
wow. So that was the impact.
it was a huge impact, and it's like she was recovering from that physical touch. It was like that she had been waiting for that to happen for almost 3 weeks. So that was a game changer. So the skin to skin was game changer. She was then eating a lot more after that too. The second day, again, continued skin to skin. And on the third day, as I am preparing to go to the hospital in the morning, they call us, they say, you can take your baby home.
Huh. So the
So,
skin to skin should have happened a lot earlier.
yeah, I think we would have been home earlier, probably a week earlier when she got out of the oxygen, but I did not have the capacity to challenge the practices in the ward. We have to understand that you might be a highly educated person, you might have all the knowledge, you have maybe prepared yourself, reading all the books, and then you're in the situation that you're overtaken by trauma, and you are in a new unfamiliar situation trying to manage, and you just don't necessarily have it in you to challenge. So that's why it's always good to have someone to advocate for you if you have capacity to have someone to help you with.
It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And when you take your child home, what practices can a parent do to help develop a secure attachment style, especially after a traumatic birth?
So I think here it's important to really be sensitive and responsive to the baby's needs. So I think with or without trauma, it's imperative that we are attuned to what the baby needs. If they're crying, you pick them up. You respond to accordingly to their needs. So if baby is, hungry, you don't give them a toy. You have to be congruent in how you start to determine what the cues are, what the baby needs. So that's obviously seems like obvious, but how you pick your baby up communicates to the baby's subconscious, their body memory. Am I loved? Am I okay? Am I accepted? So have your body awareness when you're handling baby. So be soft, rather than firm and abrupt. Be soft. Have eye contact. Be gentle. Also, tone matters. So, I know we're going to be tired. We're, hungry, sleep deprived. Mothers, we also need care, but like remembering that the tone of voice matters. Baby's always listening. So body language, tone communicate to the baby's subconscious about something about themselves. Baby internalizes these messages. And then I think for myself personally, because we had been apart for so long, it was really important to me to hold her as much as I could. So really build on to the early separation. So carrying her in the baby sling as much as I could, and building that type of connection. But also a really big part of this is to work through your own trauma.
How
In
important
time,
is that for a
it's
parent to work through their own trauma to be able to connect with their child?
I think it's incredibly. important. So we can't just ignore it. We can't put it in the background because it will haunt you. We have to give time to it, and it's easier to said than done. When do you give yourself the time to process your trauma? If you're thrown into the middle of it, you have to go to the hospital every day, and then you bring the baby home, and maybe you don't have a support network. So I think here is really important to maybe connect with the therapist. And I think something like the type of work, Erin, you do would be great for anyone to dealing with this, because you're really starting to work with your nervous system. Is your nervous system getting fired up every time baby cries? Then you might have to start doing some somatic embodied practices to help you to calm your own nervous system down so that you can really be there for your baby. So Erin, I know the work you do, and I've had sessions with you, and I think there's like a great opportunity there to use the somatic practice and body processing work to help new moms, and especially to kind of work with that trauma that might be sort of really deep somewhere within your system that you don't really have access to. Sometimes talk therapy isn't the best way to go about it, because you can talk a lot about what happened and go around the narrative, and nothing changes. So you gotta have that kind of embodied resources to help you to actually calm down or understand your own reactions, um, so that you can really be there as a secure person for your baby.
All right. And when a mom comes home, and if they have had a traumatic birth, what advice do you give them?
Again, I would say it's very important to be compassionate with yourself, to understand that the trauma might be kind of doesn't make any sense, and why me and why us and why did we have this horrible beginning. I think finding some compassion around that. I think it's also very good if you can challenge your experience, write to the hospital, follow their complaints procedures, to tell your side of the story, to tell about your experience. That can be very challenging, but if you have some support and you can give yourself some time to do that, I certainly did. I wasn't ready to write that immediately. But advice for moms for me would be that the traumatic birth itself does not have to define your entire relationship with your child. It absolutely needs to be validated as an experience. So it needs to be healed and processed. It needs to be integrated. You need to, yes, this happened. And, yes, we can grieve. We have to grieve that. But it doesn't have to be the whole story. You can absolutely build something meaningful out of it with your child, even though it feels really nonsensical right now or traumatic right now. You can build actually quite empowering story. Obviously, depending on what happened, we all might have different experiences, but is there anything empowering you can find about how you handle that, incredibly difficult time? And also, moms, I would love them to know more about this idea of matrescence. Uh, it's not really a scope, this isn't the scope for it right now, but I want mothers to be aware that they are developing through motherhood. So, especially with the first child, you'll be changing neurologically. Your brain is actually changing. Parts of them are growing, parts of them are shrinking, reorganizing. So it's like the phase of development that is akin to adolescence. So it's a huge time. We're changing as people. So a compassion for yourself again there. You're not supposed to be a fully realized mom as soon as you have the baby in your arms. we have to let go of that kind of narrative and allow that development to happen for moms. And one thing I want to say, I would love to see this incorporated in prenatal care. And this is probably what moms could ask if it's not being offered to them, is to help understand their own attachment style. So before you become a parent, it would be very helpful to know how you yourself were attached in childhood. What are you carrying? How do you relate to the world? Basically, if you don't know what it is, you can ask yourself questions like, how safe do I feel in the world? How secure I feel with other people? Is it easy for me to connect with other people, or do I tend to withdraw? That can give you clues about your attachment style. So, because attachment actually we carry throughout our lives, it's a dynamic process. It will change. I mean, it can change, but our own childhood gives us a blueprint for how we show up in intimate relationships with other adults and how we show up as parents. So it's very important that we do some internal work to know where we came from, maybe how we were parented and how we, relate to the world and how safe we feel. So maybe asking, is there anything that I could know more about attachment? It would be something you can ask in your prenatal care.
And what are the different types of attachment styles?
So, so there's really two major types. So there's the secure type, which is when there's been enough of connecting with the parent, enough of validation, feeling accepted and loved and responded to in a good enough way. Secure attachment doesn't mean that it was always rosy and perfect. That's not what it is. It means that when there was a rupture, there was repair. There was enough repair to make the child trust the parent and know that they're consistently there. So that's really, it's about trust. So the other type is then insecure type, and under that we have different categories. We have the anxious type, we have the avoidant type, and the disorganized type. So those are all insecure styles. So that means that there was something that happened in that relationship on a consistent basis that made the child not feel secure, not feel validated, seen, heard, responded to in a way that they needed. So in anxious types, there's also often this idea that parent isn't consistently there. Maybe the child doesn't know, I never know what I'm going to get, can be the theme of their life. Like one time I've been cared for, the next day I've been ignored. So it's kind of, you never know what you get. The avoidant type develops when there's too much kind of rejection, abandonment, or criticism. So the child feel like they cannot show their needs because they're going to be somehow punished or rejected for having needs. So these are children who then don't really seek out their caregiver when in times of stress, so they try and make it on their own. And obviously that's a huge burden for a child because the child should be able to have their needs met and have the support when they need.
I've been
And then,
told people with avoidant attachment styles are sometimes the people who have been hurt the most.
yeah, that can be very true. So you see this in adulthood when people feel like they cannot ask for other people for help. They have to do everything on their own. They feel quite alone in the world. So you carry this into adult relationships, and you often have anxious and avoidant types meeting each other and kind of living through their childhood patterns in a relationship. it's only when you start to actually make sense of why you have these patterns of relating, you can start consciously making changes if it's not serving you in adulthood, to respond from the young part of you that was hurt. You know, if it's no longer serving you, then you can do efforts to kind of earn the secure relating pattern in adulthood. I know I mentioned that disorganized type, and I want to say that that usually develops almost always in response to severe neglect and abuse. Disorganized pattern is about being incredibly confused in the relationship to your parent and very fearful. So if you think about attachment being biological need to go toward your caregiver, but now your caregiver is the source of fear, they might be dangerous, then there's a huge, like this huge, powerful confusion and a mismatch between what you need and what's there to meet you. So there's a lot of fear around disorganized attachment style.
Okay. And how does attachment styles affect people as an adult?
So, as I mentioned, they build a blueprint for us to relate to other people. And if we don't ever challenge them, then they will kind of rule in the background of our lives, our decisions, and our ways of being in the world. If you've had early secure attachment, you're more likely to be emotionally well adjusted. You are curious about the world. You kind of put yourself out there, and you maybe have this kind of a lot of empathy and social like social skills to relate, because you're not interacting from a place of kind of fear and perceived rejection, but you are kind of feeling that you're okay because you have an internal working model that you're loved and accepted and other people are primarily good. But if you come to the world from this insecure perspective, then you might always sense rejection when it's not really there. You don't tend to seek out other people so much because you're a bit wary of them. They might be hurting you. And you might actually not interact in the world all that much. You might not actually go after your dreams if you are held back by something that you don't even quite understand why. So I said earlier, it's like you can check yourself. If you're not sure what your attachment style is, you can ask yourself, how safe and secure I feel in the world? Like, how confident I am with other people? Do I feel like I can walk into a room and be accepted? So check your answers to that. That might give you clues. Are you feeling pretty secure, or are you more like on the insecure and sort of a bit ambivalent side?
Okay. And do you feel heard and seen in relationships?
Absolutely. Yeah, you carry that to relationships.
Mm-hmm. And as an adult, how does one start to build a secure attachment?
I think internal work is so important here. So getting first befriended with your nervous system would be great. So to do work like you do, Erin, with embodied processing and somatic work. So really getting to know where my triggers are, like why am I feeling threatened, or when do I feel unsafe? And if that's the theme of your life, then absolutely seek out that type of body work. But also starting to look around your relationships. Like, are you safe in relationships that you are involved in? And are any kind of strange dynamics playing in there? You can move towards this. There's this term earned secure attachment. So where you can, as an adult, if you've had insecure childhood, you can move towards the secure if you do that kind of internal work and you get enough positive, um, stabilizing, healthy relationships, and you begin to move to change the script around interacting with people. If you get enough of that, you can become to feel a bit more secure in the world. And in developmental psychology, we often say that, you know, sometimes we can't change the conditions for a child. For instance, we can't take away all of their negative experiences, but if they have one safe adult in their childhood, it might not be mom and dad, it can be someone else, but do they have one person that they can go to, that they can rely on? And that can make a huge difference in terms of building those positive, secure scripts. You know, like that there are other people that I can rely on. So really looking into outside of the microcosmos of the primarily family and looking a little bit outside, how can we bring in attachment, secure experiences to a child? And then also in adulthood, can I look around my life? What's bringing me the feeling of security?
And is it possible to create a secure attachment style as an adult?
So, first of all, learning about your early years, learning about your family, your primary relationships with your mom and dad. Like, if you can go there and start to make sense of it, there is often a very incoherent narrative for people who have had insecure styles as children. They don't have a really coherent narrative why they feel the way they do. They know there was something maybe going on, but they're not quite sure why. So if you have secure attachment, you can kind of talk about your past and your primary caregivers in a way that makes sense. And there's like no these blanks in memory and denial and things like that. So there's more like a coherent narrative. So also looking into how you're talking about that, and again, maybe in a therapeutic setting, it's good to go on, like, you know, pull it apart and start to make sense of your own past.
Okay, so
So
kind of like
again,
an onion, start to peel down the layers and starting to become more aware. And I find when you do this type of work, you become more aware, and it's kind of like, well, you're going on a journey, and it's a self-discovery journey as well, because you're learning. The more work you do, the more you learn about yourself, and the more you become aware. And when you become aware, and if you can start to maybe regulate your nervous system, I believe that can help.
yeah, absolutely.
And you have a 3-year-old daughter. She's 3 now, is that correct?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. My daughter is just turning 3 as well.
Yeah, so it's an interesting time. Developmentally, 3-year-olds, they are very building their independence and asserting their autonomy, um, and it's, I think, can be challenging for parents to go through that developmental phase. How are you finding it?
Hi. I have my moments, but I love it. I love being a mom, and it's a lot of fun. And she's my world. But Yeah, no, it's amazing. But yeah, there's definitely moments of frustration and like checking your own nervous system and just needing a moment just to walking away, just to cool down and come back in and re-engage. But she's the best gift I've ever received from God. It's it's amazing. She's amazing. So
That's so good to hear, and I feel the same way.
yeah.
So, and I think what you said there was so important. Like we have to give space to our nervous system to regulate, and we have to have self-compassion as moms. And I found a great way. If there is like a difficult moment with the toddler, and toddler is having a moment crying, and you feel like the best thing to do is try and connect. So I drop down so that I'm below her eye level.
Mhm.
So there's like something that happens that you're no longer, like you're not scary as a mom, but like
No, yeah.
you're standing over. They're like the primitive part of their brain that is taking over in a tantrum or a meltdown. It's like, you know, they might be fearful of that. So if you drop down their eye level, and like I put my hands, palms out like that, rather than getting her to touch my hands this way, I put them like that, so that she can then reach out to me. And I've noticed this works with her. My daughter is very strong-willed.
Mine too.
She's so these tricks maybe might be helpful for other moms as well. So to kind of be there, open, and non-threatening, sort of dip to their level.
And starting to teach them about their emotions and to name them
Mm-hmm.
and recognizing them. I think it's a bit early, but I am starting to ask where she's feeling it in the body. And just, let her know or kids know that all emotions are okay to feel. So if she's feeling angry, that's okay. Just hold space for that, right? If she's feeling sad, that's okay. Mommy can feel sad with her, right? Um, there's a technique we do in body processing that we go against the wall to release the energy of the anger. And I'll even do that, right? Like I'll just say, it's okay, go against the wall, put your arms out, just feel into the anger, or hold out, you can give your child a pillow and just let them, just grab onto the pillow if they're feeling that anger and just let them release the anger. Because a lot of times we are taught as children that certain emotions are not okay, and we learn to repress them. And what happens is there can be a lot of chronic health problems, mental health struggles, because we keep these emotions trapped in our bodies, and it can impact us years later. So it's important starting at this age to let them allow so that they can start to learn how to process their emotions properly and to know that all emotions are okay to feel. Every single one. What's your intake on that?
I think that's so great, and I'm trying to do something similar with my daughter. So and I love that you incorporating that activity with the wall. Like you can feel into your own power when you're angry. Um, and I think that's great. If children begin to learn these techniques and tools at this age, they will internalize them, and they will become of who they are. So I'm really happy to hear that you are sharing that with your daughter. It's never too young to start. And naming, understanding emotions, absolutely. And key what you said there, all emotions are valid, even the ones that are sometimes labeled as negative or bad, like anger. Anger is a valid feeling. And a lot of those emotional problems come when we repress anger. We feel like we weren't allowed to be angry. And then, anger can be a really powerful force. And if you learn to contain it, and it can become a friend rather than this kind of enemy force that runs your life.
Where anger, all emotions are a gift. And
Mhm.
anger is there for a reason. It's there to protect us and to say it's not okay when, people are crossing our boundaries. And to teach children, even at this age, healthy boundaries. And when we're talking about feeling anger, it's also learning how to approach the anger in a healthy manner, right? We can feel angry, and still be able to release it in a healthy way. And what have you seen happen to people when they're not allowed to express their anger?
So a lot of the time, well, the anger really doesn't go away. It's if you don't feel like you're safe to set your boundaries or say no, or you end up, for women often it's this kind of pleasing behavior, so you're appeasing, you're fawning, you are giving in, you are letting your boundaries be crossed. So that's one of the huge things that can happen when you don't know and own your anger, when you feel like it's wrong and you're not allowed to claim your space. It's also just being assertive. Like, can you feel that you can say no when you don't feel like yes is appropriate? Because if you feel like you're not allowed to say no, then it can have um, dangerous consequences sometimes. But I think I have to say, anger is one of the probably the most difficult emotions for many people to come to terms with. And it's no one's fault. It's just this. Society also doesn't really, um, you know, like people being angry and showing that side. So, we probably need more discussion around anger and getting to know that.
And what advice would you have for mothers?
So, I think my advice would be self-compassion and getting to know your birth story, and also sharing your birth story with your child. Let them know about their beginnings, and you can even create a story together around that you can talk, and you can begin to own your birth story and find something empowering in there. My daughter is definitely the star of my birth story narrative, because she pulled through, and she went through, I think, a lot more than I did in that. And she's really um, shines through in that way. So can
Strong.
yeah, so create a story, narrative story, a fairy tale around that, and create a tradition around that you can maybe talk about that story, so that your child also gets to know their birth. There are a lot of people out there who don't know much about details of their birth. And that's kind of sad, because it's the first experience of you coming into the world.
And meeting your mom or your dad.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining and your expert advice. It's always a pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having me.
And next month, we will be having a somatic practitioner named Maria, who will be talking about relationships. She's going to be giving us expert advice. And we will also be having guest speakers telling us about their trauma story. Thank you, everyone, for joining in.